So this is a game called Pokemon Go. When it first came out in 2016, it was the talk everywhere. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the game, basically it's an AR video game app on your phone where you can go around your neighborhood to catch Pokemon or these creatures. So the premise is quite simple. You catch imaginary creatures on your phone, but people were instantly addicted. And in fact, some people even played Pokemon Go while they were driving, which led to accidents. And so in this following news report that I will play to you, we can see how addicted people were because of Pokemon Go. Let's play the video.
You won't be able to miss it around town after you watch this story. The latest app called Pokemon Go lets game players get off their couch and onto the streets.
And we're talking the young and not so young. That's how popular it is. But as the game blends the virtual with the real world, some are finding themselves in trouble. Find out why in the 7 News Consumer Watch. What do Falls Park, the Peace Center, and Second Presbyterian Church have in common? Sure, they're all in Greenville, but they're also Pokestops on the new Pokemon Go app.
I think it's an incredibly interesting phenomena as well as possibly dangerous.
Why is that?
Well, these kids are all looking down at their phone, and not just kids looking down at their phone, and who knows what they're going to trip over.
City streets now filled with players hardly looking where they're going. Already there's been reports of Pokemon-related driving, biking, and walking accidents.
Okay, so from this brief video clip, you can see that even today, because of a simple game, we can be very focused and lose sight of our environment. So even though the game is not real, it takes up all of our attention that we're no longer aware of reality.
You won't be able.
So even in Shan headquarters in the monastery, there were many young people who came to visit the monastery to play the game, not to visit the temple, but to play Pokemon Go. So one day, I managed to convince Arthur, who was one of the staff in our department, to download the app on his phone, and so we can see what all this hype was all about. So in this game, Arthur spotted one of the creatures, a Charmander, in the dining hall of the monastery. So out of all the places that you could possibly find, it was in the dining hall. And it happened to be next door to our office building. And so he walked over to the dining hall. His eyes were completely glued to the phone to try and find the location of this creature. But there was an entrance to the underground parking lot on the way to the dining hall. And a car came out of nowhere and was about to hit him. And he was so focused on getting this creature that he didn't see the car at all. So after this incident, we both agreed that this game was very dangerous because it causes a person to be attached to the phone to the point of forgetting our surroundings. So pictured here, you can see that there's a young person who went into the train tracks in Canada in order to catch these Pokemons. So let's go back to the parable. These children are so focused on playing that they have no idea that there is a fire. So we can imagine that they're all playing Pokemon Go in this mansion, that they have no idea this is happening. And imagine yourself that you are the parent or the father of these children. You are the owner of this mansion. What would be going through your mind? You would probably feel very panicked. So what would you do? In the parable, in the sutra, the Buddha says, "O Sariputra, this affluent man thought, since I am physically strong, I could take the children out of the house in the folds of my garment or on top of a desk." So in other words, he's going to try and physically grab all the children to get them out of the house. Now, the problem is there are many, many children, and they don't necessarily want to get out because they're so attached to their toy. They're so attached to their game. So this is a strategy that might not work. So he further thought, There is one entrance to this house, and it is very narrow. The children who are immature and still unaware are attached to their place of play. They may fall into danger and be burned by the fire. I should now tell them of the danger. This house is already burning. They must escape quickly as they can to avoid being burned by the fire. So imagine being in this burning house. Children are all around you. There's so many of them to carry out one by one, and you need to save them. What would you do? So our first action would be to warn them, right? It makes sense. So for example, you might say, come out now, it's for your own good or you will burn to death. I tell you as your parent, as your mom or as your dad, come out now, you must listen to me. Or you might beg them, oh, please, please come out now. You'll burn to death. Please come out now. So this is what the father said. So after considering this, he urged the children according to his thought. Children, run out immediately. Now, what do you think the children did? The children didn't move at all. In the sutra, it says, although their father in his concern has given them the proper advice, the children are immersed in their play and do not accept it. They are neither alarmed nor afraid and have no intention of leaving the burning house. Moreover, they do not even know what a fire is, the condition of the house, or what they may lose. They merely run back and forth looking at their father. So those of us who had young children or who have worked with children would know that sometimes kids are very stubborn, and no matter how much you warn them, they are still completely oblivious to danger because they've never experienced it before. So for example, you can tell a child not to stick their fingers in the electric socket because it's dangerous, but they don't listen to you and they might still end up doing that. So even children who are our own flesh and blood do not always listen to us. So what can be said of everyone else in this world? So getting people to listen to us is very difficult indeed. So let's go back to the parable. Imagine you are the father and your children don't listen and you don't want to abandon them. So what do? What is going through your mind? Do you start to doubt yourself? Are there other ways that you can get these children out of the house? Thereupon, the affluent man thought, this house is already engulfed in flames. If my children and I do not get out, we shall perish in the fire. I will now use skillful means to help my children escape from this disaster. The skillful means refers to a person's ability to use various methods suitable to a specific audience in order to help them to liberation. So in this case, it refers to ability of the father to save the children from the fire efficiently and as quickly as possible. So since the father was already knew that his children were attached to various rare toys and unusual things that each of them liked, he said to them, the toys you are fond of are rare and hard to obtain. If you do not take them, you will certainly regret it later. Right now, outside the house, there are 3 kinds of carts. One is yoked to a sheep, one to a deer, and one to an ox. Go play with them. Children, run out of this building immediately. Run out of this burning house immediately, and I will give you whatever you want. So we can see here that instead of fear, the father uses toys and gifts to entice the children to come out. Now we might think that, oh, the father is just spoiling the children. You can't just give them gifts and bribe people like that. Otherwise, you'll always look for an incentive. However, in this case, we have to remember that it's a matter of life and death. So the most important thing is that everyone gets out safely. So the children, hearing what their father had said about the rare toys, become very excited, and in their eagerness to get them, they pushed each other out of the way in a mad rush out of the burning house. Let's translate into modern terms. So if this was happening today, what should we say to the children or people in general to get them to pay attention? For example, do we give them free iPhones, free MacBooks, or do we say, oh, you can meet someone famous? What do we say to people to get them to put down their toys and come out of the house? And since this sutra takes place in ancient India during the Buddha's time, they didn't have electronic gadgets or cars. So the most amazing thing or toy that a child could imagine were these animal carts. So the wealthy man offers them a choice between this sheep cart, a deer cart, and an ox cart. And the children come running out of the burning house. Now you think, this can't possibly happen today in society today. We're too smart for that. But now let us watch this following video on what it would take to get people scrambling out if this parable took place today. So what are your thoughts when you watch this video? When I watched this video, the first thing that struck me was how frantic these people looked. In fact, if there wasn't captions on this video, I would think that they were running away from some sort of emergency. But no, they were going for the iPhone 13. And the iPhone wasn't even free or discounted. They just wanted to be the first to get it. So as we can see from this, if you are in a building and someone tells you, oh, if you go outside right now, there will be a free Apple, there will be a free AirPod or Apple Watch or iPad mini if you come out, will you come out of the house? Most people would run out of the house immediately. In fact, as you can see from the video, people are more than willing to line up for hours simply to buy these products on discount. So back to the parable, after offering these toys to the children, this affluent man saw that his children had gotten out safely and were sitting unharmed in an open area at the crossroad. He was relieved, happy, and joyful. And the children said to their father, "Father, please give us the toys you promised, those 3 carts, one yoked to a sheep, one to a deer, and one to an ox." So in modern terms, where is the free AirPod, Apple Watch, or iPad mini that you promised? But the father didn't give him any of the items he mentioned. So what ends up happening is, in the sutra, it says, "O Sariputra, the affluent man then gave each child the same kind of large cart. These carts were tall and spacious, adorned with various jewels and encircled with railings full of hanging bells. On the top of the carts were canopies, also decorated with various kinds of jewels. These carts were draped with jewel cords and hung with flower garlands. They were thickly piled with fabrics, and red pillows had been placed about. These carts were each yoked to an ox with spotlessly white hide. These oxen had beautiful bodies with powerful muscle, even gaits, and were as swift as the wind, and there were many attendants guarding them. So instead of giving them 3 carts like he promised, the sheep, deer, and ox cart, he gave everyone the great white ox cart. As you can see here, the great white ox cart easily surpasses the previous 3 carts that he promised. So using our modern analogy, instead of getting the free AirPod, Apple Watch, or iPad, the father just decides to give everyone an iPhone instead. Now, why did the affluent man give these carts? Because the man had great and immeasurable wealth, and his abundant storehouses were full. So in other words, the man was very wealthy. And he thus thought further. Since my treasure has no limit, I should not give my children inferior carts. These are my children, and I love them all equally. I have an immeasurable number of large carts, such as these, decorated with the 7 treasures. I should equally distribute them to each child without discrimination. Why is this? Even if I gave these carts to everyone in the country, their number would not be exhausted. Why should I not give them to my own children? So the father thought to himself, since I have gotten them out of the house, I should not give them only inferior gifts. So imagine if this was Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, they would want to give their children probably the most expensive item. They would not settle for simply a free AirPod. And so these children, they each climbed into the great cart and had an unprecedented experience, one beyond their original expectations. So Sariputra, what do you think about this? This affluent man gave to his children equally a large cart decorated with precious treasures. Has he deceived them or not? So what do you think? Do you think that this father had lied to his children? After all, he promised them 3 options, right? He promised them the AirPod, the Apple Watch, or the iPad, and all they got was the iPhone. But if you were the children, you wouldn't complain because the thing that you got was far superior to the other items. And so we see that Sariputra says, no, Bhagavat, meaning the world-honored one, the affluent man only tried to help his children escape from the disastrous fire. He saved their lives and did not deceive them. This is by no means a deception. Why? Because by saving their lives, they attained marvelous toys. Moreover, they were saved from the burning house by skillful means. So we can say that the father is not considered to be deceiving the children because he doesn't have unwholesome intentions. And then secondly, his intentions is to save them from the burning house. So what can we learn from this first part of the parable of the burning house? How can we motivate others to take action towards something as dangerous as climate change? The first thing that we see is that fear alone is not enough to motivate. So in the parable, we see that the father was unable to convince the children to leave the burning house simply by telling them how dangerous it is and that they will die. And the second point is that skillful means is needed if we want people to take action. So as we can see in the parable, the children need incentives in order to put down what they're doing to come out of the house. So let's examine these 2 key points more closely. What is fear-based motivation? So this often relies on negative thinking. And it sounds like if I don't do this, or if I do this, something bad will happen. So if I don't do A, B will happen. Now, for example, in this picture, you see, if I don't paddle away from the shark, it will eat me and I will die. So in our everyday lives, it sounds like this. You might tell yourself, if I don't exercise, I'm going to get fat and I won't fit into my clothes, so I better go to the gym. Or we might tell our children, if you don't clean up your room right now, I'm grounding you and there's no smartphone time for you. Or in our spiritual practice, you might hear something like this: if you don't practice generosity, you'll end up as a hungry ghost in your next life. or if you don't uphold precepts, you'll end up in hell. So basically what this is that you use fear to get yourself or other people to do something. Now, this may be quite useful for situations where threat is immediate. For example, in this picture with the shark, the fear helps us get out of harm's way. However, there are some issues with fear-based motivation. So conventional wisdom is that fear helps us change. It helps us fight against threats. However, fear and negative emotions can also backfire. So you can see action immediately, but in the long run, such fear-based motivation is not sustainable and is more harmful than it is good. So while fear can lead to some positive action, the problem is that it also causes people to become unhappy. It causes people to be less creative. It causes people to become more depressed. So according to the research by Professor Andrew Carton at the Wharton School of Business, when an organization is entrenched with fear, it can have toxic effects over the long run. So in addition to stifling creativity, it can inhibit collaboration and lead to burnout. So if we use this strategy to get people out of the burning house, it might lead to them burning out and not want to move at all. So there's a study by a Harvard professor who found that hospital employees or nurses who were in an environment where they operated with fear reported fewer errors than those who thought it was a safe place to work. So this seems like, oh, maybe fear makes people to make fewer mistakes. However, what they found in the study by the Harvard professor was that it's actually because these employees were too afraid to report their mistakes. So it seemed like in the beginning that they were doing much better, but in actuality, they were hiding all of their faults. So we can see that fear is not always the good way to go. And furthermore, there are people who feel paralyzed by fear. So the problem is that this negative emotion can also bring about other negative emotions. So hope, on the other hand, which is what Humanistic Buddhism advocates, can bring about more positive emotions to get people to be the best that they can be and enhance their overall well-being. So the Humanistic Buddhism approach is to give people hope and strength so that they become their best self. And in last year's BLA keynote speech, the abbot of Shan, Most Venerable Xingbao, emphasized that Humanistic Buddhism is full of hope, not fear. And this is also the spirit that is embodied by my teacher, Venerable Master Xing Yun. So in the early days of Shan, Venerable Master built a Pure Land cave near the entrance of the monastery. So inside, it depicted all of the wondrous content of the Amitabha Sutra and Amitabha Buddha's Pure Land. And this was such an innovation at the time because Buddhist monasteries used to build hells in order to motivate people to do good deeds. So as you can see on the screen, this is one of the less graphic depictions of what you can see in the temples that I found. This is from a temple in Thailand. The other depictions were too graphic for me to put in this PowerPoint. So during the onset of the construction, people asked Venerable Master, why don't you construct scenes from the 18 hells and frighten people so they won't dare to do evil deeds? And Venerable Master replied, I want to build the excellence and beauty of the Pure Land of ultimate bliss so people want to visit this place. His goal was to turn people's negative feelings of fear into something that was more positive. So you could imagine if the temple was full of images of hell, we wouldn't want to go. In fact, not only are we not motivated, we just shut the teachings out entirely. So the humanistic Buddhism approach is represented through the four givings, which is to give others faith, to give others joy, to give others hope, and to give others convenience. Furthermore, the sutras say that to lead others to enter the Buddha's wisdom, we must first bait with the hook of desire. So what does this mean for us in terms of climate change? The first thing is a fear-based approach to climate change cannot be sustainable, because in the long run, it will also cause people to burn out and to feel anxious. So what we need to do is to build up an image or a goal of where we are heading, something that is more attractive, that will encourage people to want to take action. For example, in today's society, we have people who are creating initiatives to reward and motivate employees who contribute to these green environmental goals. And so people want to change because they want the reward. But as practices are developed over time, they become a habit. So in our daily life, we can use this method instead of fear to praise people that we see who are acting to protect the environment. So this is the first part of the parable. Now let's move on to part 2 of the sutra. Now that we know what approach we should take in order for people to act, the question is, what kind of actions should we take? In the sutra, the Buddha explains the meaning behind this parable. So he says, the Tathagata appears in the 3 realms, which is like a decaying old house on fire, to rescue sentient beings from the fire of birth, old age, illness, and death, anxiety, sorrow, suffering, distress, delusion, blindness, and the 3 poisons of greed, hatred, and ignorance. Because of the desires of the 5 senses and the desire for monetary profit, they also experience various kinds of suffering. Although sentient beings are immersed in such sorrows, they rejoice and play. They are not aware, shocked, startled, or disgusted, nor do they seek release. Running around in the burning house of the 3 realms, they experience great suffering, yet they do not realize it. So in other words, the world that we live in is like a decaying old house. We might think of it as grand, but it is like the house in the parable. It is fragile and it can collapse at any time. And according to the sutra, what is the fire? The fire is the suffering, is the 3 poisons of greed, hatred, and ignorance. The fire is our desire for what we see, things we hear, the smells, the taste, and touch. The fire is the desire for monetary profit. So in the Pali tradition, there's also a sutta called the Fire Sermon, and it basically echoes what we just looked at in the Lotus Sutra. In it, the Buddha says, bhikshus, all is burning. In the sutta, he says, our eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind are all burning. We are burning with greed, hatred, and ignorance. So while our external environment is heating up, we also need to examine, where does this fire outside in the world come from? It comes from our mind. If we look at the world around us, we see many people who are chasing after profit, we see that there's conflicts arising because of war, because of hatred, and it is because our minds are burning. So everything that we do causes the world around us to burn as well. So let us go back to the reading of the Lotus Sutra. So a little bit further on into the parable, the Buddha says that our house is on fire. Our mind is on fire, but most people are unaware of this. So the Buddha says, although sentient beings are immersed in such sorrows, they rejoice and play. They are not aware, shocked, startled, or disgusted, nor do they seek release. Running around in the burning house of the three realms, they experience great suffering and do not realize it. So the Tathagata says to the sentient beings, do not take pleasure in living in this burning house of the three realms, and do not thirst after inferior objects, sounds, smells, flavors, and tangibles. If you are attached to these objects and have desires, then you will be burned. Leave the triple world or the three realms in haste, and you will obtain the three vehicles. The vehicles for the Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, and Buddhas. I definitely guarantee this to you. In the end, it will come true. You should be diligent and persistent. So we can see that the three carts are equivalent to the three vehicles, which is the Shravakas, the Pratyeka Buddhas, and the Buddhas. And what these are the skillful means that the Buddha uses to get us out of the burning house of attachment. So to put it simply, these are the different ways of cultivation that can lead us out of the burning house in our mind. So for the first one, for the Shravakas, they are led out of this burning house through contemplating and practicing according to the Four Noble Truths. And so they contemplate suffering, the causes of suffering, and how to end this suffering. And in that way, they cease their greed, hatred, and ignorance. Now for the Pratyeka Buddhas, they are led out of the burning house by contemplating according to dependent origination. So by understanding cause and effect, the Pratyeka Buddhas are able to stop the fire in their minds. Now for both the Shravakas and the Pratyeka Buddhas, the achievement of arhathood or self-liberation is enough, and they do not aspire for anything more. They don't aspire for Buddhahood, which is the third vehicle. However, the Bodhisattvas are the ones who aspire for Buddhahood, and they do it through liberating both self and others. So as we can see from these three carts, there are many sorts of Buddhist practitioners. There are people who like solitary practice. There are people who like meditating. There are people who like Dharma services. There are people who like volunteering at the temple. There are others who like participating in events. So Buddhist practice may be different from person to person, but that is okay as long as we can stop the burning fire in our minds. So in the parable, the Buddha explains, "O Sariputra, that affluent man saw his children leave the burning house safely and arrive at a safe place. Knowing that he had immeasurable wealth, he gave a large cart equally to each child." The Tathagata is exactly like this. As the father of all sentient beings, he sees that immeasurable thousands of kotis of sentient beings escape from the dangers, sufferings, and fears of the triple world or the three realms through the gates of the Buddha's teaching and attain the pleasure of nirvana. So in other words, these three vehicles are all skillful and expedient means to get us out of the burning house. And once we are out of the house, the Buddha presents us with the one vehicle of Buddhahood, which is far superior to the other options. So lastly, to conclude the parable, the Buddha says, "O Sariputra, you should know that the Buddhas, with the power of skillful means, teach the single Buddha vehicle, dividing it and teaching it as three." So what are the key points that we can see from part 2 of this parable? The first thing that we learn is the real burning house is actually in our mind. It is our attachment to sense objects. It is the fire of greed, hatred, and ignorance. And the second thing is that we can learn from the parable is that there are many skillful means to escape this burning house, which is represented by the three vehicles. But ultimately, when we come out, there is only one Buddha vehicle. So how does this help us combat climate change? So the answer is the practice of environmental and spiritual protection. As we can see, it is not enough just to focus on the outside environment. We also need to focus on our minds, that the world around us is created from our actions. So if the mind is burning with greed, hatred, and ignorance, then naturally our world will also burn with greed, hatred, and ignorance. So in order for us to make sure that the climate changes for the better, then we should also change our minds. We also need to cool down our minds so that it is pure and tranquil. So this is why in the Vilamakirti Sutra, it says, if our mind is pure, then our world will also be a pure land as well. So as a practitioner, how do we take true action? It begins with ourselves, with our each and every thought. So in order for us to protect the physical environment, as well as our spiritual environment, what we need to do is to begin purifying our body, speech, and mind. So what we do, what we say, and what we think. So instead of thinking of environmental protection as something external, in Buddhism, we believe that environmental preservation should start with the mind. So today, society, we often talk about tapping into new resources and economizing on expenses. So this doesn't just apply to money and physical resources. This also applies to our minds as well. So for example, what are some more sustainable resources for happiness? So instead of putting our happiness into material objects that are subject to change and decay, we can be sustained by something that has greater longevity, which is, as you can see on the screen, gratitude, joy, patience, kindness, compassion, and equanimity. So these are the mental states that we can develop that last much longer and also cost us less money as well. So how can we develop and harness these more sustainable energy sources within our minds? We can take inspiration from the parable that we just read and apply different skillful means. So for some of us, we might choose to meditate because it helps us feel peaceful and calm. Some of us might want to contemplate on the Buddha's teachings and put them into action. Some of us might want to practice generosity and donate to other people. Others may want to, for example, work within our communities to benefit other people. So there are many, many ways that can motivate us to come out of this burning house in our mind. So yes, our house is on fire, both environmentally and spiritually. But greater than fear, we must also believe in our ability to overcome these challenges. We must believe in our ability to overcome climate change. So instead of only focusing on the negative actions and the negative consequences, we must also think about this environmental and spiritual cultivation in a positive sense. So how can we make sure that our actions are sustainable in the long run? So then we must not fall into fear. We must not fall into despair, even if the world feels very turbulent today. Instead, we must believe in our kindness. We must believe in our compassion and our ability to reach out to other people and to encourage other people to escape from the fire. So rather than fear and panic, we should have faith in our ability to take positive actions and to utilize skillful means to motivate others to do so as well. So to recap, what we have learned today regarding the parable of the burning house is that first, we should motivate with hope and encouragement rather than fear. So while fear may lead to immediate actions, people might not see the danger that you are talking about, or they might fall into despair. And second, it is better to use skillful means to provide incentives and encouragement. So let us focus on the positive outcomes of our actions rather than simply passively trying to avoid disaster. And third, the protection of the environment begins with the protection of our minds. So in our daily life, let us reflect on our mental states and transform them into a more sustainable resource that leads us to Buddhahood. So lastly, thank you very much for listening to today's talk. I hope that our reading of the parable of the burning house has given us more insight and inspiration on how we can use the Buddha's teachings and apply them to taking action against climate change. So thank you once again, and let us work together to build a pure land on earth. Thank you very much.
It is with the greatest pleasure to have you tonight, Venerable Jurue. Your insightful Dharma talk would surely be a great help in preserving and protecting our environment. As residents of this planet, it is our responsibility to protect and save our home. It begins with ourselves, our own thoughts and action, through purifying one's body and speech and mind. Thank you very much, and we hope to have more Dharma talks from you in the future. So at this moment, we open the floor to any question, clarification, and even reflection. If you wish to ask or share, feel free to open your microphone or state it on the chat box. We highly appreciate it.
So I believe now is the time for questions. So if you have any questions or comments, you can